This is the early edition, a curated weekday guide to major news and developments over the past 24 hours. Curated by Sid and Watt and read by an automated voice. Published June 25, 2026 on Just Security, an essential resource for those shaping a just and secure world. Here's today's news. Venezuela, earthquakes. Two back-to-back earthquakes in Venezuela have killed at least 164 people and injured 700, Interim President Delcy Rodriguez said, as rescuers searched collapsed buildings in Caracas and worst-hit La Guaira state. Vivian Sequeira and Mayela Armas report for Reuters. The U.S. Geological Survey said its predictive model pointed to deaths likely in the thousands, with a substantial possibility of more than 10,000, though official figures remain preliminary. William B. Davis, Madison Dong, Amy Graff, Judson Jones, John Keefe, Joey K. Lee, Bia Malski, and Pablo Robles report for the New York Times. Iran war. Lebanon. Senior Israeli and Lebanese officials denied Thursday that Israel had withdrawn from any part of occupied southern Lebanon, contradicting a U.S. official who said Israel had pulled back from part of its buffer zone as a good faith gesture. The dispute comes as Israel and Lebanon discuss a U.S.-backed pilot plan for Lebanese army control over parts of southern Lebanon, despite Hezbollah's rejection and a Wednesday Israeli drone strike that killed at least 2 people. Samia Nakul, Maya Gebeli, and Mayan Lubel report for Reuters. Rami Ayub, Mayan Lubel, and Maya Gebeli report for Reuters. An Israeli military official said Thursday that an Israeli soldier died in southern Lebanon after a vehicle overturned, describing the incident as an accident. The military had earlier said only that the soldier died during operational activity. Iran war. U.S. developments. The Senate late Wednesday voted against advancing a follow-on war powers resolution that would have blocked President Trump from resuming hostilities against Iran, after Trump pressed Republicans who had supported a similar measure a day earlier. Senator Bill Cassidy, R-Law, who backed Tuesday's resolution, voted no after a White House briefing, while Senator Rand Paul voted present and said he was giving Trump more space and leverage in negotiations. Theodoric Meyer reports for The Washington Post. Mary Claire Jelonic, Stephen Sloan, Joey Capoletti, and Lisa Mascaro report for the AP. Patricia Zengerle reports for Reuters. Trump faced Republican criticism over the Iran war in a closed-door Senate meeting Wednesday, including a clash with Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican law, who said the administration had not given Americans or Congress enough information about the conflict or its framework deal with Iran. Hours later, Senate Republican leaders blocked advancement of a war powers resolution after Cassidy received a White House briefing and switched to no. Alexander Bolton and Helen Heiskes report for The Hill. David Morgan and Patricia Zengerle report for Reuters. Iran war. Strait of Hormuz. Energy Secretary Chris Wright said Wednesday afternoon that oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz were close to pre-war levels, with roughly 72 ships and 20 million barrels of oil transiting in the previous 24 hours as tankers moved with military escorts. Wright said in a post on X that many vessels were still avoiding the main channel because of mine risks, and that full normalcy would require demining. Steph Danielle Thomas reports for The Hill. Liz Hampton reports for Reuters. A Liberian oil tanker exited the Strait of Hormuz Thursday using a new route near Oman's shore, despite Iran's Revolutionary Guard warning that routes not coordinated with Tehran were dangerous and prohibited. The transit came amid U.S.-Iran disputes over the interim accord, shipping access, possible mines, and Iran's claimed authority over the waterway. The West Bank. Palestinians and Israeli rights groups criticized an Israeli bill that would extend Israeli civil control over ancient sites in the West Bank, warning it would amount to annexation and support settlement expansion. The bill, which has passed one of 3 parliamentary votes, would place sites under Israel's Heritage Ministry and allow related land expropriation, while Israeli backers say it is meant to protect ancient remains. Russia-Ukraine war. Moscow's main oil refinery is expected to remain out of production for at least 6 months after Ukrainian drone strikes hit the plant twice this month, 2 industry sources told Reuters. The refinery is the largest fuel supplier to the Moscow region, and its shutdown adds to Russia's widening fuel crunch as officials consider a diesel export ban and possible fuel imports, while public gasoline sales remain suspended in Crimea. Ukrainian drones knocked out power in Sevastopol, Russian-occupied Crimea's largest city, and targeted facilities in Russia's Nizhny Novgorod, Orenburg, and Moscow regions, officials said, as Kyiv intensifies long-range strikes on Russian energy, military, and supply infrastructure. Ukraine said the latest attacks hit the Orenburg gas processing plant and 2 Russian satellite communication centers, while President Volodymyr Zelensky said Ukraine would continue preemptive attacks on facilities Russia uses to expand its war effort. Reuters reports. Ilya Novikov reports for AP. The Kremlin denied a Wall Street Journal report that Moscow is pressuring Belarus to help expand the war in Ukraine, while Zelensky said Belarusian relay stations allegedly used to guide Russian drones had stopped working. Reuters notes that Russia has relied increasingly on Belarusian refineries to supply gasoline and diesel as Ukrainian strikes strain Russia's domestic fuel market. Reuters reports. Sudan. New Sudanese pound notes have begun circulating in areas controlled by the Rapid Support Forces, raising questions about their source and potentially deepening Sudan's de facto division. Reuters could not determine where the apparently unused notes came from, but their emergence follows the RSF-linked TASIS authorities' creation of a parallel cabinet and central bank structure. Khalid Abdelaziz and Nafisa El-Tahir report. Reuters documented 3 Sudanese refugee deaths in Egyptian prisons this year, and reported that authorities have deported more than 5,500 people since November, a sharp rise from about 100 formal deportations annually in 2023 and 2024. Former detainees described overcrowding, abuse, extortion, scarce water, and filthy conditions, while UNHCR said returns to Sudan should not take place given the ongoing conflict and humanitarian crisis. Africa. Kenyan police blocked major roads into Nairobi and fired tear gas Thursday, as demonstrators marked 2 years since deadly anti-government protests over tax hikes and the cost of living. Protesters and victims' families called for justice, credible investigations, and accountability for police conduct, while President William Ruto said the government would allow protest but prevent efforts to shut down the country. Evelyn Musambi reports for AP, Edwin Okoth and Vincent Mumonzilani report for Reuters. Nigeria's Senate approved a constitutional amendment Wednesday allowing the country's 36 states to create their own police forces alongside the federal police, a major shift from centralized policing amid escalating insecurity. Supporters say state police could improve response to kidnappings and militant violence in underserved areas, while critics warn governors may use them to silence opponents. Ope Adetayo reports for AP. Zimbabwe's Senate approved constitutional amendments Wednesday that would delay the 2028 presidential election to 2030, extend President Emerson Mnangagwa's term by 2 years, and replace direct presidential elections with selection by lawmakers. Critics say extending presidential terms requires a referendum, and warn the bill has intensified repression and intimidation around legal challenges. Other global developments. Iraq will consider all available options if OPEC does not significantly raise its production quota, a senior Iraqi oil ministry official told Reuters, while separate sources said Baghdad had weighed leaving the group but currently plans to stay and seek a higher quota. The warning comes as Iraq faces a severe financial crunch linked to the Iran war, and would add pressure on OPEC after the UAE's departure earlier this year. Russian opposition politician Maxim Kruglov, deputy leader of the anti-war Yabloko party, was sentenced Wednesday to 7 years in prison for allegedly spreading false information about the Russian army in Telegram posts. Kruglov denied wrongdoing and said the case showed Russia had imposed a ban on dissent. Andrew Osborne reports for Reuters. Cambodia's Supreme Court upheld treason convictions and 14-year prison sentences for 2 journalists who posted photographs related to border clashes with Thailand. Rights groups said the case criminalized journalism and underscored worsening press freedom, while Cambodia's information minister said the ruling reflected national security limits on expression. Sofeng Chiang and David Rising report for AP. Reuters reports. French President Emmanuel Macron said France's navy intercepted another Russian Shadow Fleet tanker near Sicily on Tuesday, days after a similar British operation. Macron said France had intercepted at least 5 tankers it says Russia uses to evade Western sanctions and finance the war in Ukraine. Hungarian rights groups criticized Prime Minister Peter Magyar's draft constitutional amendment to immediately remove President Tamás Sulyok and impose a 12-year term limit on members of parliament. Amnesty International Hungary said impeachment would be a fairer process, while the Hungarian Civil Liberties Union said term limits should be considered only through a broader constitutional review. Anita Komovis reports for Reuters. Hong Kong police arrested 2 people on suspicion of selling seditious publications and receiving funds from foreign political organizations under the city's 2024 national security law. Local media identified one as pro-democracy former district councillor and bookstore owner Letitia Wong, though AP could not independently verify the identities. Taiwan held a tabletop drill Thursday simulating a Chinese maritime blockade, including a scenario in which Beijing requires ships entering or leaving Taiwan to seek Chinese approval, and then escalates to inspections, boardings, searches, and seizures. Taiwanese officials said the response would combine Coast Guard action, military readiness drills, and diplomatic messaging that China was violating freedom of navigation. Ben Blanchard reports for Reuters. Technology. Anthropic accused Alibaba of illicitly extracting Claude model capabilities through a distillation campaign that generated more than 28.8 million exchanges across nearly 25,000 fraudulent accounts between April 22 and June 5, according to a letter seen by Reuters. Anthropic said the campaign, allegedly linked to Alibaba and its Qwen AI lab, could accelerate China's access to Mythos preview-level capabilities. Alibaba did not immediately respond to Reuters' request for comment. Karen Freifeld reports for Reuters. Representative Frank Pallone, the top Democrat on the House Energy and Commerce Committee, said Wednesday he supports a national moratorium on AI data centers until Congress can ensure they do not harm air, water, or power bills. Pallone cited rising electricity costs, water use, air pollution, and potential PFAS risks, saying Mid-Atlantic ratepayers paid more than $9 billion last year for electricity tied to data centers and big tech AI demand. Rachel Frazen reports for The Hill. U.S. Gulf Affairs. Secretary of State Marco Rubio visited Bahrain on Thursday to seek Gulf support for the Trump administration's preliminary Iran accord, telling regional allies that any U.S.-Iran deal would account for their security, and that no country has the right to charge for use of international waterways. Gulf officials remain concerned about the draft accord's proposed reconstruction fund, lack of missile limits, disputed inspection terms, and possible expansion of Iran's leverage over Hormuz and regional security. Graham Slattery reports for Reuters. Graham Slattery and Jana Chokir report for Reuters. The U.S. Embassy in Kuwait resumed operations Wednesday during Rubio's visit, months after services were suspended following Iranian attacks on U.S. missions in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. The embassy will immediately resume emergency services for U.S. citizens, with other services phased in over time, Reuters reports. U.S. Foreign Affairs. U.S. Central Command said Wednesday that U.S. forces killed senior ISIS member Ali Hussein al-Ulawi in a June 19 airstrike near Deir Hassan in northwest Syria. CENTCOM said the strike was part of ongoing efforts to disrupt ISIS operations, as sleeper cells continue to operate in Syria following the fall of the Assad government. Ellen Mitchell reports for The Hill. The Trump administration plans to move forward with a more than $700 million sale of General Electric jet engines for Turkey's Ka-on fighter program, despite objections from some members of Congress, sources told Reuters. South African civil society groups warned that women, adolescent girls, and other vulnerable groups are already losing HIV prevention services as the Trump administration phases out more than $400 million in annual PEPFAR support for South Africa. The State Department says most programs will wind down by the end of September, while health groups report clinic closures, layoffs, and weakened community delivery of PrEP and prevention services. Mogomotsi Magom reports for AP. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte met with President Trump at the White House Wednesday ahead of next month's summit, as Trump raised concerns about Allied support during the Iran war, and the Pentagon reviews U.S. troop levels in Europe. Rutte pointed to European backing for Washington and increased defense spending, while Trump continued to press allies for greater loyalty. Michelle L. Price and Will Weisert report for AP. Humaira Pamuk reports for Reuters. Italy rebuked General Rutte after he said 500 U.S. planes had taken off from bases in Italy to support Operation Epic Fury, the U.S. name for the Iran war. Defense Minister Guido Crosetter said Rome authorized only technical and logistical, non-kinetic activities and had refused requests outside those limits, Reuters reports. U.S. defense firm Anduril is in talks to acquire Nissan's Opama assembly plant near Tokyo to build military drones in Japan, sources told Reuters. A deal could convert a landmark post-war auto factory into an arms production hub, as Japan seeks to expand defense manufacturing amid concerns over a possible Taiwan Strait crisis. Tim Kelly, Maki Shiraki, and Yoshifumi Takamoto report. U.S. domestic developments. Senator Tom Tillis, RNC, said he regrets casting the decisive Senate vote to confirm Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, telling Notice that Hegseth just doesn't have the experience, and criticizing what he called sophomoric execution at the Pentagon. Tillis also questioned the 60-day U.S.-Iran framework, saying a deal that leaves Iran weakened but without long-term commitments would be an absolute waste of life, time, and treasure. Ghislaine Maxwell argued in an amended habeas petition made public Wednesday that newly released Epstein files show her due process rights were violated because lawyers for Epstein accusers allegedly acted as de facto prosecutors and government agents. U.S. Attorney Jay Clayton said most claims were untimely and the rest speculative or legally flawed, arguing Maxwell failed to undermine her proper conviction and just sentence. Jonathan Stemple reports for Reuters. Frank Carone, former chief of staff to then New York City Mayor Eric Adams, and 3 others, were charged by federal prosecutors in Brooklyn on Wednesday with bribery, wire fraud, and obstruction over an alleged scheme to steer a $6.83 million emergency migrant shelter contract to a Queens hotel. Prosecutors allege the hotel's owner and business manager routed $120,000 to Carone through his brother's law firm after Carone pushed city officials to reconsider the hotel. Carone's lawyers called the prosecution utterly misguided. Stella Canino Quinones reports for The Washington Post. Jake Offenhartz and Dave Collins report for AP. Former New York City Council candidate Jonathan Rinaldi was charged with forgery over allegations that he used AI to post fake endorsements, fabricated news articles, and doctored images during his campaign. The Queen's District Attorney's Office said the posts falsely claimed support from civic groups, public institutions, and political figures, while Rinaldi framed the case as a First Amendment issue. Gene Johnson reports for AP. South Dakota Republican State Senator Thomas Pischke faces 2 felony counts for allegedly submitting falsified or forged documents to place candidates in state Republican Party elections without their knowledge. Pischke, who is seeking a 3rd term, turned himself in Tuesday and was released ahead of a July 7 initial hearing. Sarah Raza reports for AP. New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham called Wednesday for a criminal investigation into the DEA, after an AP investigation found agents allowed hundreds of thousands of fentanyl pills to reach the streets while pursuing larger trafficking cases. The DEA said its decisions were lawful and reasonable, but the governor said the agency knowingly risked lives. Jim Mustian reports for AP. Trump administration actions. An internal Interior Department memo, reviewed by The Washington Post, instructs employees, including National Park Service staff, not to confirm deaths, suspected deaths, or the severity of injuries in national parks, limiting public statements to basic incident and response information. Current and former park officials said the guidance marks a break from prior disclosure practices and could undermine visitor safety, while Interior said it was intended to create consistent communications rather than conceal fatalities or delay information. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth blocked behind-the-scenes efforts by Army officials and lawmakers to extend the career of General Christopher Donahue, head of U.S. Army Europe and Africa, who is expected to step down July 2nd after an unusually brief 18-month tenure. People familiar with the matter told The Washington Post. Donahue, a highly regarded former Special Operations commander, is the latest senior military leader to depart amid Hegseth's broader removals of generals and admirals viewed as insufficiently aligned with the administration. Dan Lamothe reports. General Donahue is set to step down July 2nd and retire unless Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth nominates him for another 4-star post, multiple sources told CNN. His departure comes as Hegseth reviews U.S. force posture in Europe, and the Army prepares to downgrade the command from a 4-star to a 3-star role. Haley Britsky, Zachary Cohen, and Davis Winke report. The White House asked Congress Wednesday for an $87.6 billion supplemental package, led by $67 billion for the Pentagon, tied to the Iran war and other defense needs. The request also includes additional national security funding for the Coast Guard, FBI, Energy Department, and State Department, alongside money for Ebola response and farmer aid. Noah Robertson reports for The Washington Post. Philip Timotija and Ellen Mitchell report for The Hill. Postmaster General David Steiner told senators Wednesday that, under a proposed USPS rule, the agency would not deliver mail ballots for states that refused to provide lists of voters who requested absentee or mail ballots. Democrats said the rule would coerce states into sharing sensitive voter data with the Trump administration and turn USPS into an election gatekeeper. Steiner said the Postal Service would comply if a court blocks the proposal. David Shepardson reports for Reuters. Phineas Swai reports for The Hill. The Justice Department warned California on Wednesday that its new block ban violates the Second Amendment and said it has authorized a federal lawsuit unless the state agrees by Tuesday to stop enforcing the law. The measure, set to take effect July 1st, bars licensed dealers from selling or transferring machine gun convertible pistols, including Glock models that DOJ says California has targeted, because they can be modified with illegal aftermarket conversion devices. Ashley Fields reports for The Hill. President Trump met with major munitions makers at the White House Wednesday, as the administration pushes to replenish U.S. weapons stockpiles depleted by Iran operations and allied supply commitments. Sources said officials pressed industry to move faster on air defense and precision weapons production, including Patriot, THAAD, Tomahawk, and AMRAAM systems. Trent spoke with Live Nation CEO Michael Rapino in February, weeks before DOJ settled its antitrust case against Live Nation and Ticketmaster. Company lawyers disclosed in a court filing on Monday. The company said they did not discuss substantive settlement terms, but also said White House lawyers were involved in some communications with DOJ. Kara Scannell reports for CNN. The Pentagon has restored mandatory flu shots for all military recruits after Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth made the vaccine optional in April, as a flu outbreak at Lackland Air Force Base sickened nearly 300 people. A Pentagon official said the renewed mandate was unrelated to the outbreak, while AP reports that only 40% of incoming Lackland trainees opted for the shot when it was optional. Konstantin Toropin and Mike Stobbe report for AP. David Winke and Zachary Cohen report for CNN. Trump administration litigation. 3 international criminal court judges sued the Trump administration Wednesday in federal court in Manhattan, challenging sanctions imposed on them last year after ICC actions involving Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and alleged U.S. war crimes in Afghanistan. The judges argue the sanctions exceed the International Emergency Economic Powers Act and were designed to punish and pressure them for judicial decisions, leaving them unable to use banking, travel, online, and some health insurance services, Daphne Psaladakis reports for Reuters. A federal judge Wednesday dismissed the Justice Department's Sanctuary City lawsuit against Newark, Jersey City, Patterson, and Hoboken, holding that DOJ lacked standing to challenge local policies that largely mirror New Jersey's statewide immigrant trust directive. U.S. District Judge Evelyn Padine said the statewide directive would remain in effect even if the city policies were invalidated, and that any differences DOJ identified were too minor or speculative to keep the case going. Joey Fox and Daniel Hann report for Politico. The Sixth Circuit on Wednesday rejected DOJ's bid to force Michigan to turn over non-public voter roll data, including dates of birth, partial Social Security numbers, and driver's license numbers, holding that Title III of the 1960 Civil Rights Act did not authorize the demand. Judge Andre Mathis wrote that DOJ was invoking a law enacted to combat voting discrimination for the inverse purpose of checking whether some people had voted, in the latest setback to the department's nationwide push for confidential state voter data. Tierney Sneed reports for CNN. Ed White reports for AP. A federal judge in Boston permanently barred most of Trump's first election's executive order, including its proof of citizenship requirement for voter registration. District Judge Denise Casper held that the order violated separation of powers because the Constitution gives election rule authority to states and Congress, not the president. Julie Carr-Smythe and Michael Casey report for AP. A federal judge in Manhattan temporarily blocked the Justice Department from obtaining identifying and sensitive health information for transgender patients treated as minors at New York City hospitals between 2020 and 2026. District Judge Catherine Polk-Thala found plaintiffs were likely to prevail on claims that the subpoenas violated informational privacy and Fourth Amendment protections, and set a June 8 hearing on further relief. Max Rego reports for The Hill. Larry Neumeister reports for AP. In case you missed it, yesterday on Just Security. Seeking Justice the Day After SCOTUS Killed the Alien Tort Statute, by Rebecca Hamilton. Supreme Court Closes the Door on the Alien Tort Statute, by William S. Dodge. Reflections from Today's Judiciary on the Anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, by Ryan Goodman, Jack Palmer Cool, Sivan Watt, and Simone Lipkind. Thank you for listening to Just Security's early edition today, June 25th, 2026. If you enjoy listening, Just Security's analytic articles are also available in audio form on the justsecurity.org website. To stay up to date on Just Security's analysis of law, policy, and current events, go to justsecurity.org, subscribe to Just Security on Substack, and follow us on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, and Threads.